American General Benedict Arnold has just learned that his plot to surrender West Point to the British has been foiled. Leaving behind his wife and infant son, he flees to a waiting boat on the Hudson River.
Born for a curse to virtue and mankind, Earth's broadest realms can't show so black a mind. Night's sable veil your crimes can never hide, each one so great they glut the historic tide. Defunct, your memory will live in all the glare that infamy can give. Curses of ages will attend your name, traitors alone will glory in your shame. Almighty justice sternly waits to roll rivers of sulfur on your traitorous soul. Nature looks back, with conscious error sad on such a tainted blot that she has made. Let hell receive you, riveted in chains, damned to the hottest of its flames.
For Americans, his name is synonymous with treason, disloyalty, and treachery. But before he returned his allegiance to the King of England, he was a heroic patriot leader of the American Revolution.
The Arnold story deepens and enriches our comprehension of the American Revolution and what it was all about. And by investigating his life and by investigating what made him a hero and ultimately investigating what perhaps turned him into the greatest villain of the Revolution, we will learn much more about what this revolution was all about and in the end what it did actually accomplish.
Benedict Arnold was born into a culture and family environment that would shape his destiny. One of the largest cities in the colonies, Norwich, Connecticut, was a center of wealth, commerce, and trade. Dating back to the founding of Rhode Island, the Arnold family was one of the wealthiest and most influential in all of New England. But early in his life, his alcoholic father ruined the family finances and disgraced their social standing in the eyes of the pious and unforgiving community.
They lost 3 children one terrible winter, and it devastated the father. And he took to liquor, and he drank so much that he suffered dementia because of alcoholism.
Brothers and sisters in Christ.
A woman of deep faith, Benedict's mother was drawn to a puritanical movement in New England known as the Great Awakening, which taught followers to fear a vengeful God.
Exodus chapter 20.
The local community's judgment of Arnold's father was swift and brutal.
That whispering that you can just imagine through the byways of the Norwich community, and Arnold could feel that. And there's a resentment that begins to build in him.
They lost their place of honor in the front pew of the church, a devastating rebuke to Arnold's mother.
Thou shalt not kill.
If you had a mother, like Arnold had, who took all of this very deeply to heart and pounded it into a child's mind, that you had to be ready at any moment, that God could take you, and that there was a possibility that if you hadn't lived the right life, you would burn forever in the fires of hell, especially if Arnold's father, who took to drink, one would have to assume that your own father was destined for damnation. Not an easy thing for a boy to handle at any age.
This is a fellow who is being confronted at a very early age with what his mother is teaching him is arbitrary power, that it can just strike you dead.
the members of the congregation of God.
A God of wrath, judgmental neighbors. These adversaries were just the beginning of Arnold's fight against arbitrary power that will follow him for the rest of his life. Impoverished, Benedict's mother sent him to live with relatives in their Norwich home. They ran an apothecary and took the boy in as an apprentice.
It must have been an enormous blow to Arnold, who expected, as sons of gentry and merchants did, that they would go to college, who really expected a trajectory of a gentleman.
While he was living away from home, Benedict's mother died, making his situation even more desperate. The rest of his life is spent in a constant search for honor.
After 7 long years of indentured servitude, he got his first chance to rebuild the family wealth and restore its good name when the relatives who had sponsored his apprenticeship set him up in an apothecary shop of his own. Proud of his new venture, he christened it with the Latin motto Sibi Totic, meaning for himself and everyone.
Arnold grew his business into a major shipping and trading enterprise operating between New England and the Caribbean. Even though he was at sea for long stretches, his wife and family were never far from his thoughts.
My dear girl, you and you only can imagine how long the time seems since we parted, and how impatient I am to see you and the dear little pledge of our mutual love. God bless you both, and send us a happy meeting soon.
While ashore on business, another ship's captain insulted Arnold's wife. This affront to her honor did not go unchallenged.
Reputation is very much a part of gentility in the 18th century. So we can tell how sensitive he is while he's in the Caribbean. He actually does engage in at least one duel for somebody who said something that he considered slighting to his honor or his reputation. Arnold really wanted to shoot somebody. He does have a rather ferocious reputation. Other people tend to back off. This is a guy who's not afraid to kill somebody if his honor requires it.
Even though he became one of the wealthiest merchants in the colonies, Arnold himself was never fully accepted into prominent social circles.
I think that if one makes a great deal of money in America today, your past is sort of forgotten. You are what you are at the moment. But New England had a pretty long memory. It's not so easy to move in and out of that level in society for someone like Arnold.
This social rejection made him particularly receptive to the revolutionary ideals sweeping through the colonies.
We're talking about a society that is more egalitarian, where there are more and more people believing that they are equal to all other peoples socially.
This may explain why Arnold so strongly identified with the independence movement, which was to end the aristocratic control of the colonial economy and unleash entrepreneurs like him. He thought a man should be rewarded for his own accomplishments, not just by being born into the right family.
In 1765, the British Parliament imposed a new tax on all of the paper the American colonists printed. The money raised was used to pay for defending the American frontier.
The stamp tax came like a bolt out of the blue. It broke the club rules, which had always allowed the colonies to govern themselves.
Arnold was an outspoken critic of the stamp tax.
By God, I give you notice.
After 5 years of bitter recriminations, the dispute turned into open conflict when British soldiers opened fire on protesters in Boston. When he heard about the Boston Massacre, He was astonished.
I am very much shocked by the accounts of the most cruel, wanton, and inhuman murders committed in Boston by the soldiers. Good God, are the Americans all asleep and tamely giving up their liberties?
And Arnold was an individual who did not and would not tolerate other individuals trying to control and manipulate him. Arnold was an opposer of arbitrary power throughout his lifetime.
Arnold didn't like to be dictated to, and I think the things that he rebelled against personally, he saw on a larger level nationally. He didn't want his state, his colonies, to be subservient to the British in the same way that he was not going to be subservient to another man.
After the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in 1775, Arnold was ready to put his personal fortune and his life on the line.
As animosity between the colonists and Crown escalated, Arnold organized and financed a Connecticut militia company and served as its first captain. Arnold was an idealist from the start. He had his men sign a pledge.
Driven to the last necessity and obliged to have recourse to arms in defense of our lives and liberties, we promise to conduct ourselves decently and inoffensively as we march. A truly virtuous deportment will be ours at all times in serving so great and glorious a cause.
And that's a very, very important statement that is being made at that particular point in time, and that Arnold will live up to that ideal.
Arnold marched his men to Boston to help contain the British. When he arrived, the rebels were in desperate need of artillery. And he knew just where to get it. Having made several trading expeditions through the Champlain Valley, he knew that Ticonderoga, the British fort on Lake Champlain, was lightly defended and had cannon and other armaments which could be easily captured. Massachusetts commissioned him to go to Ticonderoga and take the cannon.
Connecticut commissioned Ethan Allen for exactly the same mission to Fort Ticonderoga. Among the men Arnold recruited for his mission was John Brown. They were related by marriage and had known each other for years, but at Ticonderoga, Brown sided with Allen against Arnold, becoming one of his most fierce rivals. Allen's band of militiamen, known as the Green Mountain Boys, was more numerous than Arnold's recruits.
According to New York authorities, there were a bunch of frontier squatters and bandits squatting on New York land, so they had a sort of a mixed reputation.
The two parties converged in a small town near Fort Ticonderoga.
I think if you want to claim one place in terms of a geographic location as to where Benedict Arnold's troubles began, I really think it's probably Castleton, Vermont.
How goes it with you all? Gentlemen, if I may have your attention, please. My name is Benedict Arnold. I've been sent here from Massachusetts.
He sets a bad impression right off the bat by coming into the tavern in Castleton and wanting to meet with the leaders of this raid on Ticonderoga and saying that I have authority to take Fort Ticonderoga by the colony of Massachusetts Bay.
To join me.
Arnold and Allen eventually agreed to a tenuous joint command. In a daring night raid, Ticonderoga was surrendered to the Americans.
With the fort captured, Arnold expected the Green Mountain Boys to conduct themselves with dignity and decorum. Instead, they raided the alcohol stores, got drunk, and started pilfering the fort. Arnold was horrified.
Had it not been for Arnold, everything at Fort Ticonderoga would have been in the utmost confusion and disorder. People would have been plundered of their private property, and no man's person would be safe that was not of the Green Mountain Party. Barnabas Dean.
The Green Mountain Boys get so tired of Arnold trying to tell them what to do. They actually shoot at him a few times.
He put a stop to the plundering, but made an enemy of Ethan Allen. Likely because of shared interest in some land rights, Brown sided with Allen. This will have a far-reaching impact on Arnold's future as an American officer.
To attack Ticonderoga, this huge fort full of cannon, garrisoned by the king's troops, this was truly an act of war.
Arnold knew this monumental act of defiance called for a public justification. So in June of 1775, a full year before the Declaration of Independence, he committed to paper a Declaration of Principles in which 30 fighting revolutionaries signed and vowed in the most solemn manner never to become slaves to Britain. Arnold inventoried 200 artillery pieces. The following winter, 59 of the best cannon would be carried 300 miles over 56 days and used to pound British forces from Dorchester Heights in Boston.
Arnold initially goes to Ticonderoga to get the cannons. When he is there, he starts to recognize that this is a bigger thing.
Looks up the lake and realizes that the lake itself is the key strategic geographical item in that whole area. Anyone trying to come from Canada south or trying to go from New York north into Canada has to use the lake between the mountains. There are no highways. There are no other ways to transport equipment or troops.
Lake Champlain is the 18th century version of I-95. The British strategy obviously was if you could drive down Lake Champlain with troops and a small Navy flotilla, you can control the entire region.
So he puts together a little makeshift fleet, a captured schooner that he puts artillery on, and several bateaus.
Arnold went to St. John's, the British outpost on the north end of the lake. He was actually invading Canada. He would go on to capture a ship and some valuable supplies, even though no war had yet been declared.
And he's now the master of the lake.
He wanted to hold the strategic passage at all cost, but he privately worried about material support from the Continental Congress.
His instinct was right. Congress would not commit resources.
At the same time, Arnold's nemesis, Ethan Allen, along with John Brown and others, openly challenged his command authority.
And if you are going to publicly, especially publicly, go against Benedict Arnold in the presence of others, Benedict Arnold is going to make sure that he returns the favor.
Allen and Brown vowed to do everything they could to destroy Arnold. They used their influence to get him removed from command of the Champlain region.
Putting pen to paper, they would set up Arnold as a scapegoat should their actions get them into trouble.
And they're going to write very derogatory comments and reports against Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold is not doing any of this. Benedict Arnold, I think, goes into this rebellion with a sense of that politics should not override the military situation, the safety, the causes of liberty, the ideals of republicanism and equality.
So Arnold gets displaced and essentially removed. It's his first taste of the kind of injustice that he would come to resent.
Settlers in the region appreciated his efforts and bid him a fond farewell. Arnold was eager for a new mission.
He will visit General Philip Schuyler in Albany, New York.
A wealthy landholder and merchant, Schuyler was a patriot of far-reaching influence.
He understood that Benedict Arnold did not have the connections like he did, He understood that Benedict Arnold did not have the upbringing and the class like he did, and so he thought he would use his power and influence, which he had, to help Benedict Arnold out, because he had such a high opinion of Benedict Arnold.
While visiting at the Schuyler Mansion, Arnold will receive very sad word that his wife, Peggy Mansfield, had passed away. And so he will pack up very quickly and he will travel overland back to New Haven.
Every recollection of past happiness heightens my present grief, which would be intolerable were it not buried in a public calamity.
The cause of her illness is unknown, but her death left Arnold a widower with 3 young sons. His sister Hannah was now in charge of the family shipping and trading business. She was not alone. Many other women took on great responsibilities during the war effort.
But these women literally kept the businesses going, kept the shops going. They kept the blacksmith shop running. They ran the printing presses. They got out in the field. It was really interesting because the image had been that women couldn't do many of these things. They learned all of this in 5 minutes.
With barely enough time to grieve and attend to his family, Arnold continued to sacrifice his personal life for the Patriot cause and traveled to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where George Washington had made his headquarters.
Washington is looking for is someone who can command a detachment that will march into Canada and will seize Quebec City as the key to bringing Quebec province into the rebellion.
Washington's convinced that Arnold is the man to do it. He gives him a commission, makes him a colonel in the Continental Army, and gives him the command of the expedition.
Among the volunteers for Arnold's mission was Captain Daniel Morgan. He had marched his company of riflemen to the Boston area from the Virginia frontier.
Morgan was a big, imposing man. We know he was at least 6 feet tall or more. Very muscular, colorful, colloquial, joked about himself. Daniel Morgan was, in my opinion, one of the 2 most effective combat leaders in the Revolutionary War. Arnold and Morgan were furiously effective on the battlefield.
Quebec, and indeed much of Canada, much of eastern Canada, was going to be used as a staging point from which British troops would move south to suppress the rebellious colonies. The attack on Quebec made great strategic sense.
Arnold had to prevent his column from being detected.
The route that Arnold had to pick, if he was going to have any possibility of surprise at all, had to be through a march almost due north through a wilderness that had been mapped, and that only vaguely, just once. If I can paraphrase another historian, he was attacking without fear and without maps. He really had very little idea of what he would find in the way of terrain and the natural obstacles that might be out there.
The season was already turning cold when the expedition finally moved up the Kennebec River into the Maine wilderness. The bateaux, small flat-bottom boats, were constructed from green wood, which caused major problems for the men.
Our bateau began to leak profusely. A swift current, shallow water, and rocks aplenty soon ground out many of the bottoms. Dr. Isaac Center.
When you consider the badness and weight of the bateau and large quantity of provisions we have been obliged to force up against a very rapid stream, you would have taken the men for amphibious animals, as they were a great part of the time underwater. Benedict Arnold.
Water in the boats had ruined precious food supplies. Daily rationing is now required. To make matters worse, evening temperatures had started to dip below the freezing mark. Arnold supported his exhausted troops by maintaining a bold command presence, exuding confidence as he moved through the column.
We are stumbling over old fallen logs, one leg sinking deeper in the mire than the other. Then down goes a boat, and the carriers with it. Private George Morrison.
It was not uncommon for families to follow soldiers on expeditions. One of these women, Jemima Warner, stayed back with her sick husband.
She tarried by him until the end, since she had no implements to dig a grave. She covered him with leaves, took his gun, and left him with a heavy heart. Private Abner Stocking.
This courageous young woman took her husband's place in the line and was later killed by artillery fire.
A prodigious fall of rain has raised the river upwards of 3 feet. With our provisions almost exhausted, we have but a melancholy prospect before us.
Now into late fall, the expedition had reached a critical juncture. To go forward with what little food supplies remained, or risk death from severe weather or starvation. Arnold assembled his officers for a council of war. One by one, they spoke their minds. To come this far and fall short of George Washington's objective of capturing Canada was unthinkable to Arnold. The officers agreed to press on to Quebec.
With plans written, Arnold ordered Colonel Roger Enos to send his best troops forward with provisions. In blatant disregard to those orders, Enos refused to send any food and instead turned back in retreat.
Colonel Enos will later be charged with desertion, and though acquitted, his retreat had dire consequences for the 600 troops he left behind to starve.
He cuts out about 40% of Arnold's strength. Not only did Enos lead 350 to 400 soldiers back to Cambridge, but he took the supplies that would feed those soldiers with him.
The men were obliged, in order to sustain life, to eat their dogs, cartridge boxes, old shoes, and clothes. Private Simon Phobes.
I found them almost destitute of any eatable whatever, except a few candles, which were used for supper and breakfast the next morning by boiling them in a watery gruel. Dr. Isaac Center.
The company awoke with their clothes frozen a pane of thick glass, which proved very disagreeable. Captain Simeon Thayer.
Some of them lay down to go to sleep and they don't wake up the next morning. They have frozen to death. I think you're leaving bodies then in the snow. It's not just footsteps, you're leaving bodies in the snow.
As they approach Canada, Arnold starts to send men ahead and try to arrange for supplies. Finally, he himself goes on and reaches the very edge of civilization and purchases cattle supplies, actually sending cattle on the hoof.
We thought we were seeing a mirage when we were blessed with the finest sight my eyes ever beheld. Private Matthias Ogden.
We shed tears of joy in our happy delivery from the hand of death. Captain Simeon Thayer.
Arnold took great personal interest in the well-being of his suffering men. A young private named John Henry, who was near death with fever, would recount.
The commander knew my name and good-naturedly inquired after my health. He ran down to the riverside and hailed the owner of the house which stood opposite across the water.
Thank you.
Private John Henry.
He made arrangements for Henry's care and paid the Canadian settlers for food and lodging.
Extraordinarily, Arnold's column makes it to Quebec, and really through the force of Arnold's personality. Quebec is this massive walled fortress perched on top of these huge cliffs looming over the river. I mean, it seems impregnable.
Arnold knew crossing the St. Lawrence River would be treacherous. On November 13th, weather conditions were favorable. It proved to be even more harrowing than George Washington's later, more famous crossing of the Delaware River. Once they were across, Arnold and his men lay siege to the city.
Arnold continued the siege to posture, to bluff, to try to get the British to surrender, but they wouldn't.
Governor Sir Guy Carleton, the British commander, refused to be lured out of the walled city and onto the open plains. He knew that was exactly how the previous French commander of Quebec lost the city to the British 16 years earlier.
Meanwhile, having conquered Montreal to the west, American General Richard Montgomery joined the American siege with another 300 troops, the total attack force now numbering 900 men.
Montgomery takes command, and they look at the situation. They attempt also to convince the British to surrender. They won't. Both men know they don't have adequate force to attack the fortress of Quebec. They also know, however, that at the end of December, most of their troops are going home. Their enlistments run out on the last day of December. So if they're going to do anything, it's got to be done right then. And they resolve to assault Quebec.
To attack this formidable fortress with such a handful of men was really a terrific gamble. But yet, that was the quintessential Arnold. He was ready to do it.
The rebels prepared for the assault and marked their hats to recognize each other in battle.
So the night of December the 31st turned out to be a perfect night in one sense, in that they beat their deadline for enlistments, but also it was a very snowy night, which gave them some measure of protection.
Arnold and Montgomery assaulted the fortress city of Quebec with their relative handful of men. They came at it in two columns, up the cliffs from the St. Lawrence River into one side of the town, and Arnold came from the opposite side of the town. Along with him was Daniel Morgan. They stormed the city in a blinding snowstorm. The wind was so fierce. One of the men who kept a diary said, the snow was blowing horizontally into their faces. That's how strong the wind was.
The snow and the wetness would cause weapons to typically malfunction. So you basically could see only about maybe 10 or 15 soldiers around you, and you couldn't count on anything happening to the left or to your right. And moreover, the dampness and the difficulty of fighting in that sort of condition made it very, very difficult for you to be successful. That's generally why 18th century armies didn't fight in the wintertime.
Just at the point where Montgomery was about to break into the city, he encountered an outpost. And Montgomery and two of his aides were killed in the first blast of gunfire. The New York troops, Montgomery had referred to them as the sweepings of the New York streets. So they weren't the classiest guys in the world. They ran for their lives. Arnold and Morgan and their men were left assaulting the city on one side, and the British quickly caught on that they'd routed the other American column, so they threw all the men that they had in the city, 3,000 or 4,000, at Arnold's men. And Arnold was hit in the leg in one of the first exchanges of fire, and horribly, painfully wounded.
Our commander called to the troops in a cheering voice, urging us forward. For many, however, the sight of their disabled leader dampened their spirit. They kept moving toward the barricade, but whispered to each other, "We are sold." Private John Henley.
As the sun started to rise the next morning, the snowstorm had ended.
Viva liberty! Viva liberty!
Morgan and his men break through into the lower part of the city. But they were not received as liberators.
But pretty soon it became obvious that there was no hope. They were being shot at from house windows. They were taking casualties, and they fell back and pretty soon surrounded.
Morgan was cornered just outside a small Catholic church.
And ultimately, Morgan put his back against a wall and was enraged and pulled out his sword and said, "Shoot me, I will never surrender to you."
Morgan, he wouldn't surrender his sword to the British. He was too proud to do that. So a French priest was sort of milling around on the edge, and Morgan saw him. He said, "Are you a priest?" The guy said, "Yes." He said, "I'll surrender my sword to you and not to these despicable British." Morgan really hated the British, I should add.
While Morgan was being captured, Arnold was in surgery.
The ball entered the outer side of the leg, about midway between the knee and ankle, before taking an oblique course downward and lodging at the rise of the Achilles tendon. I and others entreated Colonel Arnold for his own safety to be carried back into the country where the enemy would not readily find him, but to no purpose. Instead, he ordered his weapons loaded with a sword on his bed. He was determined to kill as many as possible if they came into the room. Dr. Isaac Center.
Arnold refused to give up. This is the amazing thing. He was in agony, in pain, yet he managed to rally. He maintained a siege of Quebec throughout the winter of 1776. It was sheer legerdemain. The British had 3 or 4 times as many men inside the city as he had outside, but yet he managed to intimidate them into not attacking them. Of course, he was sending desperate messages back to Philadelphia saying, please send us men. We can still win this struggle for this 14th colony.
Everything is at a standstill for want of resources, and if not obtained soon, our affairs in this country will be entirely ruined.
Winter turned to spring as Arnold waited for news from Congress. Morgan and the others who had been captured languished as prisoners of war.
We are neglected by Congress and pinched with every want here. With the soldiers reduced to the condition of a great rabble, I hold out little prospect for a return of good fortune. We labor under almost as many difficulties as the Israelites did of old, obliged to make brick without straw.
Once again, he was disappointed by the lack of support and leadership from Congress.
With British troops pouring into Quebec, Arnold knew that the prospects for the Americans were bleak. He decided that a strategic withdrawal was the best course of action. Dropping back through Montreal, he ordered his troops to leave behind nothing of use to the enemy.
We destroyed all the bateaux and all the bridges in our rear. There will be more honor in making a safe retreat than hazarding a battle against such superiority. I am content to be the last man who quits this country and fall, so that my country will rise. Benedict Arnold.
Arnold's column makes it to Quebec, and really through the force of Arnold's personality. They started referring to him as the American Hannibal for leading the men through the wilderness in this way. It was quite extraordinary.
Even in London, the British ministry had come to grudgingly appreciate Arnold's military abilities.
I am sorry Arnold's escaped from Canada. I think he has shown himself the most enterprising man amongst the rebels. Lord George Germain.
By the spring of 1776, the war for independence was hanging by a thread. What began as patriot fervor and high idealism had faded into the realization that this war would be a long and painful struggle. After sacrificing great blood and treasure for years to defend the colonies against the French, the British were not about to surrender this valuable piece of their empire.
And in that year, landing in Staten Island in New York Harbor was the largest expeditionary force England had ever sent anywhere. All told, 48,000 British and Hessians came to America, 13,000 into Canada, 35,000 into New York City, and 500 ships. The Americans were flabbergasted.
The British government now began to realize it had a full-scale rebellion on its hands. How was it going to respond? Its plan was simple and direct. The plan was to take and hold the Hudson River corridor in order to cut off the rebellious New England colonies from the rest of North America, in order to cut Washington's supply lines, to enable the Army of Canada under Carleton and the British Army of the Atlantic under General Sir William Howe to link up together to form a potent combined force.
Horatio Gates is now the man responsible for the defenses of the Lake Champlain area.
Because of his experience as a sea merchant and trader, Washington sent Arnold to assist General Gates.
Arnold knows about ships, he knows about sailing, he knows about seamanship. So he puts Arnold in charge of building the fleet and fighting the British on the lake.
Arnold, who is perfectly skilled in maritime affairs, has most nobly undertaken to command our fleet upon the lake. With infinite satisfaction, I have committed the whole of that department to his care, General Horatio Gates.
Arnold faced a daunting task: create a fleet with very little resources and few seasoned sailors.
He doesn't have skilled carpenters. He doesn't have skilled mariners. They don't know how to make the boats. I mean, they're very crudely made.
As he was building the fleet, congressional delegates in Philadelphia were approving the Declaration of Independence. Above their signatures, the closing line read, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor."
To Arnold, these were not just empty words. He had already sacrificed his own finances, risked his life, and shed blood for the cause. And nothing was more valuable than his sacred honor.
Unfortunately, not everyone in the independence movement aspired to such high ideals. That summer, Moses Hazen, a friend of John Brown and Ethan Allen, was court-martialed for the loss of valuable baggage during the retreat from Quebec. Because Arnold had charged Hazen with this misconduct, he had to testify against him. But Brown manipulated the proceedings to focus on Arnold's conduct, and the hearing erupted into mayhem. One of the rival officers admonished Arnold.
"You have drawn upon yourself the hearing board's just resentment, and nothing but an open acknowledgement of your error will be conceived as satisfactory." Colonel Enoch Poor.
Arnold was outraged.
I cannot but think it extremely cruel when I have sacrificed my ease, health, and a great part of my private property in the cause of my country, to be calumniated as a robber and thief, at a time, too, when I have it not in my power to be heard in my own defense.
Infuriated by the board's conduct and his honor in question, Arnold challenged the hearing board members to a duel.
Since I have injured the very nice and delicate honor of the hearing board officers, I will by no means withhold from any gentleman of the court the satisfaction his nice honor may require.
No one accepted his offer. But this confrontation is just one of many political brawls that he will have with his fellow compatriots.
In the early summer of 1776, General Sir Guy Carleton, who is both Commander in Canada and Governor General of Canada, understands that if he's to move south, he must be able to conquer the lakes. In order to do that, he needs to build ships.
A naval arms race began. Arnold understood that Fort Ticonderoga did not have enough ammunition to defend itself from a major naval attack. His only hope was to block the British advance well north of the strategic fort.
So he starts north with 10 ships. He has let word be known that he is going to raid St. John's, where Carleton is building his fleet, knowing that spies will carry that word up. He's bluffing. He doesn't have the ships at all to do that. He goes up to about the Canadian border and postures there long enough to make the British worry, and it works.
It's not until early September that Carleton returns and discovers the full extent of the threat he's facing. He realizes he needs the firepower of HMS Inflexible, which has to be dismantled, brought overland, and reassembled at Lake Champlain. 28 crucial days are lost.
The clock was ticking, and the longer he could keep the British at bay, the less likely they were to be able to capture Ticonderoga before the winter winds started to blow and everybody had to go back to Canada and get into a hut.
Arnold understood if they went head-to-head with these larger British vessels, they would be destroyed.
The American gunboats and gondolas needed an advantage.
Arnold tries various positions at the north end of the lake, trying to find what is tactically going to be the most advantageous. He finally hits on this idea of setting his ships up between Valcour Island and the shore of New York to the west. It's basically a narrow gap between the islands that forms a little bit of a bay on the south end.
So as the British ships moved south with the wind, they would sail right past Valcour Island and would even see Arnold's fleet.
This is a brilliant maneuver on his part. A ship in the 18th century could not sail up against the wind.
But some of his officers doubted the plan. They were afraid Carleton might come down the New York side of the island and trap them.
Arnold had a dinner for his officers. He basically calls them together.
To death or glory.
Sort of like a band of brothers technique that Horatio Nelson's going to later use at the Battle of Trafalgar. It's an amazing night for the Americans.
A strong north wind sweeps down the lake. Arnold knows it will soon bring the British Armada with it. Arnold and his men ready for battle. Wet blankets are placed over powder kegs to protect them from flying sparks. Sand is spread on the decks to provide traction when they are covered in blood. And they wait.
Like most British commanders, General Sir Guy Carleton completely underestimated the capacity of the Americans to fight. Confident that with the firepower of HMS Inflexible and the gunboats he had built, he could achieve an easy victory. He sailed serenely down Lake Champlain.
Arnold, I suspect, was afraid that the British would sail right past him and not even notice him. And he sends two of his vessels out just to make sure that the British are aware that he's there. He doesn't want them to ignore him. He wants them to turn and fight.
British cannot get their larger, heavier ships in close. So it essentially negates their ability to bring their heavier ordnance to play against the lighter, less defended American flotilla. And as a result, the British have to move in their gunboats to get in close.
And it was a tremendous battle that lasted 6 or 7 hours. A very bloody battle. There were Indians on the shore. They were firing at Arnold's men.
The two fleets just pound away at each other. The Americans had guns that shot a 9-pound ball or a 12-pound ball, or on some occasions an 18-pound ball. The British had much larger guns, 24-pounders that shot a massive 24-pound iron ball, which was enough to pass clean through any one of Arnold's ships that would hit. This is devastating firepower, and the British and Germans used it very effectively, pounding away at Arnold's fleet for hour after hour.
Naval fights of the 18th century are bloody affairs because they're close quarters with splinters and shot and grape shot and metal flying everywhere and wood and people dying and rigging falling, and the death and the carnage is absolutely astounding. Screams and shrieks and yells with cannonballs careening about the decks and people falling overboard, drowning. Arnold was one of the few who knew how to train a cannon, so he was running from gun to gun. I think Arnold's idea was that his men needed to see him. As long as you were standing out there, the men would be inspired by your example, and that's exactly what he did for most of the fight.
And all the officers followed Arnold's example, and they stood up in their ships.
The American fleet takes by far the greater amount of damage. Only one of the British vessels is actually destroyed, one of the gunboats that has its powder magazine blow up. Other than that, British gunboats, which were very small targets, very difficult to hit, were largely unscathed.
After 6 hours of close quarters naval combat, neither fleet has won the day. But the Americans have taken a severe beating, losing over 60 men during the first day of the engagement.
And night began to fall. The British decided that they would pull back and blockade Arnold inside Valcour Bay. And then in the morning, they'd have this 20-gun ship lead their fleet in and blow what was left of Arnold's fleet to pieces. He had a conference with his captains, and they decided there's no future in going another round with the British in Valcour Bay. A lot of men in a battle get rattled, but he never stopped thinking.
Arnold noticed that the British, because they have larger ships, didn't really hug the shoreline all that much.
As darkness blankets the area, Arnold implements a daring and nearly impossible plan that could either save the flotilla and its men or end in complete destruction.
He puts a lantern on the back of each one of his ships so that you can only see the light itself, and each ship follows one behind the other like horses in a line.
The badly injured men struggle to suppress their moans as he quietly leads his ghost-like fleet through the nighttime fog.
Now, the British are astounded the next morning when the fog finally lifts. It was like he magically transported his entire fleet past the British fleet without being discovered. It was an amazing feat of seamanship and skill.
Having barely escaped the British fleet, the men must now row for their lives.
They hadn't eaten, they hadn't slept. You got an enemy bearing down on you, and you've been rowing all night long. You're tired, you're worn out.
Now, the winds on Lake Champlain are very fickle, and Arnold's fleet is trying to head south. The wind is coming right out of the south, impeding their progress. But they can't sail. All they can do is try to row into it.
The powerful Royal Navy is now stalking them.
To stay ahead of the British, Arnold's sailors had to row all day. They take refuge in the shallow waters of a small island. It's still 35 miles to Fort Ticonderoga, and they are still in enormous danger.
Arnold's intention was to use the larger vessels, the row galleys, as sort of a rear guard to try to protect the more vulnerable gondolas as they ran south on the lake trying to reach Ticonderoga.
Like a wounded animal, the American ship at the rear is struggling to keep pace with the rest of the fleet and is easy prey. After receiving several broadsides, the ship's captain surrenders.
Arnold is alone in staging a rearguard action.
Gentlemen, your attention. Captain,
and at this point, he does what is perhaps one of the most amazing and courageous things in this entire three-day running battle. He holds the Congress back and engages with the larger British ships that are coming after his fleet. For 2.5 hours, he fights with dodging and weaving and firing and running in this crazy ongoing battle, which he couldn't possibly win. And they were so incredibly outmatched. But Arnold holds himself back and holds the British ships back to give his vessels that last little moment to escape. Four of the gondolas and his vessel run aground. Arnold sets them all on fire. He never surrenders them. The flags were still flying when the ships went up in flames, and he leads his men through the woods back to Ticonderoga.
It was a significant amount of leadership and command presence for him to even get back with the 4 ships that he does, and then to get into Ticonderoga in safety was an amazing feat of officership.
Carleton, always a cautious officer, decided to return to Canada rather than forge ahead. He blamed his hasty retreat on the approaching winter weather.
The season is so far advanced that I cannot yet pretend to inform your lordship whether anything can be done this year.
So Benedict Arnold, by sheer bravado and seamanship, has delayed the British invasion of America from the north for what amounts to 1 full year.
When news of Arnold's heroics reached the public, praise and accolades followed. Delegate Benjamin Rush of Pennsylvania proclaimed in Congress, "General Arnold has conducted himself like a hero." His exploits were also the topic of conversation in London. In a widely read paper of the time, a British naval officer wrote,
"Arnold not only acted the part of a brave soldier, but also amply filled that of an able naval commander."
What Arnold did at Valcour Island was prove that it's entirely possible to lose a battle, but win a campaign.
I think Valcour Island is one of the most unheralded battles in the entire American Revolution. I believe that it was crucial to maintaining that door closed to the British.
I would argue that the Battle of Valcour Island was Benedict Arnold's crowning achievement for a number of reasons. One, because he was entirely on his own. He had no one to defer to. He was taking his fleet up against overwhelming odds with nobody to turn to except himself. This was entirely his doing. It was a fleet that he had been largely responsible for creating. They were men that he had personally trained and tactical decisions that he alone had made.
As 1776 drew to a close, the rebellious Americans have little else to give them hope. Washington's army has suffered defeat in Brooklyn and is forced to retreat into Pennsylvania. But with Arnold eliminating the British threat from the north, troops and resources became available for George Washington's heroic crossing of the Delaware River and victory at the Battle of Trenton in New Jersey. The rebellion would live on, for now.
Benedict Arnold returned home to a hero's welcome. He finally received the honor and respect he had so long sought. He now believes more than ever that the ideals of the Revolution will support his quest to return his family name to great prominence.
Ready? Here we are.
Following the capture of Newport, Rhode Island by British forces in December 1776, General Washington assigned Arnold to a command position in the New England region.
It was a position General Horatio Gates expected for himself, but Washington did not trust Gates. He needed a general in that region who was not afraid to harass and even engage the British if circumstances called for military action.
Because Arnold, the junior officer, now has been favored over Gates, the senior officer. Gates begins to think of Arnold not as a compatriot in arms, but as a rival in arms.
In retaliation, Gates made common cause with Arnold's old nemesis, John Brown. In January of 1777, Brown was actively lobbying Congress to block Arnold's promotion to Major General. He published a broadside defaming Arnold with a litany of alleged crimes he'd committed. General Gates was more than happy to bring Brown's allegations to the attention of his own friends in Congress.
In February, Congress promoted 5 officers over Arnold. The reasons were basically political.
The delegates have chosen a very civil way of requesting my resignation.
But Washington would not accept Arnold's resignation. Instead, he wrote to Congress in an attempt to correct the situation.
I am anxious to know whether General Arnold's non-promotion was owing to accident or design.
It was no accident. Congress had set limits on the number of major generals to be appointed from each state. Connecticut already had its quota.
One of the most important things that we have to look at in the American Revolution is looking at the fact that these are a union not from one central country, but of really independent communities. A person would identify themselves as a Virginian or a Pennsylvanian before they would identify themselves as an American.
All the things that America was supposed to be fighting against, this is what's happening to him. Promotions are being doled out based on what state you're from, who your friends are, and of course there was all this intrigue going on behind Arnold's back.
Arnold saw this political favoritism for other less deserving officers as an example of arbitrary power. No better than the corrupt British system of awarding military rank based on social class.
At this point in their relationship, Arnold still viewed Gates as his ally and asked him for help in securing the promotion he thought he deserved. In frustration, he personally confided to Gates in a letter.
I am surely the victim of some villain who has been busy with my fame and basely slandered me. I'm conscious of committing no crime, except it be a crime to have sacrificed my interest, ease, and happiness in the public cause. Their extremely cruel action surprises and mortifies me. My heavens, I will have justice, and I'm a villain if I seek not a brave revenge for injured honor.
Tragically, during this time, Arnold mistakenly believed Gates would be his ally, and that General Washington was no longer his advocate. In reality, Washington was his best ally, and he pleaded with Congress on Arnold's behalf.
Surely a more active, a more spirited and sensible officer fills no department in your army. Arnold, being the oldest brigadier, will not continue in service under such a slight.
Amid the political infighting and backstabbing, Arnold's friends tried to warn him about the situation.
Samuel Chase was one of them, and he wrote to Arnold and he warned him, kind of cryptically, your best friends are not your countrymen. You know, trying to indicate to Arnold that there is intrigue going on, that there is talk behind his back, and it's not helping him.
Frustrated, Arnold was about to leave for Philadelphia to protest his non-promotion, when word arrived of a new British attack in his jurisdiction. Duty called. His trip to Philadelphia would have to wait.
In April 1777, British General William Tryon and a force of 2,000 men plundered and burned their way through the Connecticut countryside. The former Royal Governor of New York, Tryon had long advocated punishing the civilian population for their rebellion.
Arnold was hoping, of course, that the militia was going to rise in force and help in this fight against the British. The militia didn't turn out in the way that Arnold had hoped they would. About 200 or so militia against 2,000 British regulars. So that in itself is a pretty gutsy maneuver.
All right, men.
Don't be scared.
He prepares to take a
Hold the
stand
line.
against Tryon's overwhelming force at the small village of Ridgefield.
With so few men in support,
Men, hold on.
Arnold positions himself in front of the American line to encourage his men.
Be brave. Steady.
Arnold rode up to our front line and, ignoring the enemy's fire of musketry and grape shot, exhorted the troops by the love of themselves, posterity, and all that's sacred, not to desert him.
Hold the line. Hold the lines.
When a British detachment climbs a ridge, they put the Americans in a crossfire, and the thinly spread line of militia cracks.
Hold the line. We can take them.
In a fierce volley, Arnold's horse is hit and crumbles to the ground as an enemy soldier shouts, "Surrender! You are my prisoner!"
Not yet.
Over the next 2 days, his ragtag band of soldiers harassed the British as they circled back to the coast.
As the British boarded their ships, they reported seeing a relentless Arnold attempting one last assault. A musket ball ripped through the collar of his coat, and he had a second horse shot out from under him.
I wish we could strike a medal showing a platoon firing at General Arnold, on horseback, his horse falling dead under him before his retreat. John Adams.
The ballots being taken, Brigadier General Benedict Arnold is promoted to the rank of Major General. John Hancock.
When Congress learned of Arnold's heroics at Ridgefield, he was finally promoted to Major General, but his seniority of rank was still behind those promoted back in February. Consequently, other officers of the same rank who had once served under Arnold would now have command authority over him.
He goes to Philadelphia to try to get his promotion backdated and his name cleared of Brown's false allegations. However, he was quickly reminded of the tensions between the civilian and military leadership.
I am wearied to death with the wrangles between military officers, high and low. They quarrel like cats and dogs. They worry one another like mastiffs, scrambling for rank and pay like apes for nuts. John Adams.
This was sort of like a back-of-the-hand sort of thing. It was like, remember, soldier, we're the civilian authority, and we can punish you anytime we want to.
This attitude fed Arnold's growing disillusionment with Congress.
Arnold was not a political animal, and very often he was quite naive in this respect.
A board charged with investigating Brown's allegations got bogged down over accounting details. When the board finally issued a statement that it was satisfied with his character and conduct, Congress would still not restore Arnold's seniority.
Arnold had had enough. He tendered a letter of resignation to Congress. In Canada, General John Burgoyne was placed in command of British forces.
The year 1777 began with the Loyalists calling it the year of the hangman, because the 3 sevens looked like gallows. They were going to crush the Americans completely.
The new offensive was to have 3 armies converge on Albany, New York. Burgoyne would lead an army south out of Canada. General Sir William Howe would come north out of New York City, and Colonel Barry St. Ledger from the west. This 3-pronged pincer move would effectively cut the colonies in half.
The war escalated to a ferocious level of violence as nearly 400 Native Americans allied with the British joined General Burgoyne's march out of Canada.
The Americans retreated ahead of the relentless British march south, and the British Army recaptured Fort Ticonderoga, the prized stronghold on Lake Champlain that Arnold had helped capture 2 years earlier.
George Washington needed his fighting general back in the Northern Theater.
If General Arnold has settled his affairs and can be spared from Philadelphia, he should be immediately set out for the Northern Department. He is active, judicious, and brave, and an officer in whom the militia will repose the greatest of confidence.
Arnold set aside his disagreements with Congress and immediately rode north to join General Schuyler, as Washington had requested.
Schuyler's troops tried to do everything they could to hobble the British advance, felling huge trees, flooding low lands, and destroying bridges.
We're really talking about primeval forest here. We're talking about places where men have not cultivated the land at all. Huge trees, huge underbrush and overgrowth, literally fighting your way through the forest as you're fighting through the war.
It's going to create a delay. And that delay in Burgoyne's advance is going to really be what the American army needs to reconstitute itself so that they can finally defend against Burgoyne's invasion.
As the British continued south, their Indian allies captured 2 Loyalist women, Sarah McNeill and Jane McCrae. A fiancée of one of Burgoyne's officers, Jane was held for ransom. But when 2 warriors argued over the reward for her capture, one settled the dispute in tragic fashion.
The Indians scalped, stripped, and butchered her in the most shocking manner.
Arnold was stationed nearby and was the first to report on the incident. He knew the story of this bloody murder would stir the local settlers to rise up against Burgoyne's brutal terror campaign. So he sent messengers to spread word of the massacre throughout the region.
It was like a lightning bolt that went through. The news of Jane McCrae's massacre spread everywhere. And the idea that this is what the British brought. They brought death to women. They brought people taking your cattle and your crops. And this radicalized people in upstate New York.
Patriot volunteers rallied to help defend the upper Hudson Valley. But on the Western Front, the British forces had the Americans at Fort Stanwix under siege.
It's a small contingent of British forces and a lot of Indians. That's very dangerous. And Schuyler decides that has to be stopped.
It's within Philip Schuyler's jurisdiction to lift the siege if he can. But of course, he's facing John Burgoyne's army, which is his real problem at the moment.
He looks around for a colonel or a brigadier to lead forces out to encounter that. None want to go. It looks like a lost cause, and it's going to be very dangerous and very, very, very risky for anyone who accepts it. They all back off. Arnold, who's a major general, says, well, if no one else will go, I'll take it.
Schuyler could not spare many men for the mission, so Arnold comes up with an ingenious trick to make up for the lack of manpower.
Along the way to Fort Stanwix, Arnold's men captured a loyalist named Honyost Schuyler. He held great influence over the Mohawk because they saw the mental affliction he suffered as a sign of being touched by the Great Spirit.
Facing a death sentence as a British conspirator, Honyost agreed under pressure to cooperate. With bullet holes shot through his clothes to prove it, he warned the Indians that Benedict Arnold, who they called the Dark Eagle, was fast approaching, with as many men as there are leaves on the trees.
The Indians huddle together and decide they're going to leave. So they do. They take off, leaving the small British force alone, and the British commander decides, well, I can't fight them without the Indian allies. I certainly don't have the power to confront Benedict Arnold and his force, so he takes off. So Arnold, without ever having to engage in a major battle, has relieved the threat to the American flank out there.
One prong of the three-pronged British strategy to capture Albany was defeated. The second prong, led by General Sir William Howe coming north through the Hudson Valley, failed to materialize.
General Howe, who was the commander-in-chief in New York City, and General Burgoyne, who was coming down from Canada, cordially detested each other.
As early as May 1777, General Sir William Howe was warning Burgoyne not to expect any troops from him.
Burgoyne cheerfully wrote a sort of snotty note to Howe saying, and he didn't need any help from Howe. So Howe said, well, great, then instead I'll conquer Philadelphia, and left Burgoyne on his own in northern New York.
Burgoyne is left with little prospect of reinforcement and an unreliable supply line. On August the 16th, 1777, he sends a raiding party of some 700 Hessians to nearby Bennington to obtain provisions. But they are met by an overwhelming force of Patriot militia. By the end of the engagement, all 700 Germans are killed or captured.
But meanwhile, the Americans were also endangering their posture because there was an ongoing feud between the Americans in New York State and in New England.
With General Philip Schuyler caught in the middle of internal strife, Congress forced Washington to make a command change. When Arnold returned from his Fort Stanwix expedition, he found that Schuyler, the New Yorker, was replaced by the New Englander's favorite,
Major General Gates.
General Horatio Gates.
Daniel Morgan, who had been released in a prisoner exchange, joined Arnold and Gates with his riflemen. Among the new arrivals are free blacks. Numbering over 400, these free black soldiers will serve with valor at Saratoga.
This fighting for freedom became very, very important for the free black, and many of them enlisted and volunteered to fight. This will be the most integrated army that we will see until really the 1960s in Vietnam.
By September of 1777, American troop strength was building. Altogether, more than 1,400 militia and Continental regulars rallied to confront Burgoyne's army.
Arnold and Gates moved the army up to Bemis Heights, and that's picked because it's high ground right overlooking the Hudson River.
And it is understood that Burgoyne, no matter what, has to go down that valley because of the way that his army is being transported. He cannot fully separate his army from the river no matter what he does. He has to go down the river valley. In order for him to do that, he has to defeat the American defenses at Bemis Heights. In order to do that, he has to strike at the summit.
Time is running out for Burgoyne. His supplies are short, and he must reach Albany before winter. Though far from supplies and reinforcements, the British Army is still dangerous and searching for an opportunity to deal the Americans a decisive blow. Oneida scouts, allied with the Americans, report that the British are on the move. On the morning of September 19th, Arnold hears a cannon fire. He knows the signal means the British are coming.
Arnold, who was always very aggressive, who wanted to be the one attacking, and urged Gates to send the troops forward to drive Burgoyne back to the Hudson River. Gates was very reluctant to leave his defenses.
After these two generals were arguing back and forth, Gates agreed to a compromise. He said, all right, you can order out Daniel Morgan's riflemen and Henry Dearborn's light infantry for support. When the British picket of the center column comes to move against them, they fire upon them very quickly, doing very direct damage. Daniel Morgan's men, of course, seeing this British retreat of the pickets, were elated.
Seeing confusion on the British side, Morgan's men pressed the attack.
So what does Benedict Arnold do? He is going to send out a reserve for Daniel Morgan. He's going to support him, and he's going to support him via individual regiments. Throughout the day, his entire division of the army.
Morgan's probing maneuver has stirred up a hornet's nest, and the first Battle of Saratoga begins near the farm of a loyalist named John Freeman. The Grand Armies trade blows.
Arnold is able to throw the British back, inflict a lot of casualties. Arnold has the British in a position where they can be wiped out if Gates will just counterattack, if Gates will just move forward out of his defensive positions.
General Gates.
He rides back to Gates and tells him, here's our opportunity. We can do it now. We can end the war. We can defeat him right here.
Sir, this is our time. We can crush them.
Gates allows one small unit to go out, but he orders Arnold to stay back.
Sensing the resistance by American forces and the pressure mounting against his lines, Burgoyne sends for Hessian troops waiting in reserve. But Gates refuses to send reinforcements. Without Arnold on the field, the battle rages without leadership. Disgusted by his commander's lack of action, Arnold races back to the fight yelling, "By God, I will soon put an end to it." Gates thinks the battle is going according to plan and fears Arnold may do something rash. He sends a young adjutant to track him down and force him back to camp.
That action of Gates, when he refused to let Arnold go back into the battle, and he pulls out of the mix the one person who's going to make it happen, that speaks volumes about his ability or his inability as a battlefield leader.
The Hessians' reinforcements join the battle, and the fighting intensifies. Both sides suffer substantial casualties, but the British hold the field as night approaches.
That would be as much as the Americans would accomplish that day. Without the reinforcements and without Arnold's leadership, nothing else was going to happen. They weren't going to accomplish anything without the one man who'd been out there leading them all day long.
The crash of cannon and musketry never ceased until darkness parted us, when they retired to their camp, leaving us masters of the field. But it was a dear-bought victory, if I can give it that name, as we lost many men. William Digby, British 53rd Light Company.
The British were basically stopped in their tracks, and they fell back. Arnold had proven to the British and to his own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of the American troops that they could meet the British head-on in a face-to-face battle and hold their own. This was crucial. The Americans hadn't done this before.
The courage with which the Americans fought were the astonishment of everyone, and we've now become fully convinced they are not the contemptible enemy we had hitherto imagined them. Lieutenant Thomas Anbury, British 24th Foot.
On this day has been fought one of the greatest battles ever fought in America, And I trust we have convinced the British butchers that the cowardly Yankees can, and where there is a call for it, fight. Major Henry Dearborn.
Tactically speaking, an American loss, but it was strategically a victory because it stopped the British on the field. The British would have gained the initiative had Benedict Arnold not brought his division to the field of battle. Battlefield loss or no battlefield loss, it is Benedict Arnold who strategically won the First Battle of Saratoga.
Arnold was not only the hero of the field, but he had won the admiration of the whole army. Captain Ebenezer Wakefield.
But his commanding officer, General Gates, was jealous of the admiration and heroics displayed by Arnold on the battlefield.
He wrote a report to Congress in which he didn't mention Arnold's name or Morgan's name. He pretended that he was the genius behind the whole thing.
Arnold took this omission as an affront to his personal honor and to the honor of those who served under him.
Stand aside!
Are you sufficiently familiar with your Bible to know?
Shoot this one, sir!
Pretty soon Arnold was storming into Gates's tent, screaming curses in his face. He was not a timid soul, to put it mildly. Arnold was infuriated, which, and let me say, every officer in any army in the world would have been infuriated by this kind of treatment.
You have no business calling us up a general!
That's their bread and butter, to get mentioned in dispatches if they do something worth mentioning. And Arnold had done tremendous things that day, and he was totally ignored by this intriguer, General Gates.
Finally, Gates relieves Arnold. He takes him out of command, tells him it's perfectly okay for him to leave and go back to join Washington. The officers in the Army realize that Gates is not the kind of man to lead them into a fight, and Arnold is. They want to go into the next battle with Arnold. They sign a petition for Arnold to stay.
I did not choose to serve General Gates. I will sooner see him drawn and quartered than do anything for him out of my line. But Arnold I will cheerfully serve. Lieutenant Richard Varick.
Arnold alone is due the honor of our late victory. He is the life and soul of the troops, enjoying the confidence and affection of his officers and soldiers. They would, to a person, follow him to conquest or death. Lieutenant Henry Livingston.
Arnold wrote a letter to Gates outlining his grievances while reconfirming his commitment to the cause.
I have every reason to think your treatment proceeds from a spirit of jealousy. I do not wish to command the army or to outshine you. I only express my zeal for the cause of my country, in which I expect to rise or fall. I am determined to sacrifice my feelings to the public good and continue in the army at this critical juncture when my country needs every support.
2 long weeks pass. Despite the urging of Arnold and other officers, Gates refuses to go on the offensive. This hesitation allows the British time to strengthen their fortified lines.
Burgoyne was getting increasingly desperate. As the weeks passed, his supply line back to Canada was getting weaker and weaker.
So he's either got to retreat or he's got to attack them. On the 7th of October, he sends out a third of his army in a strong reconnaissance of force to find the Americans' left flank. And when he finds it, he is either the next day going to attack them around that flank or withdraw back toward Canada. That's his plan.
Aware of the British troop movement, Morgan pleads with Gates to send troops to meet them.
As you will, Morgan.
Finally, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Gates agrees to let the game begin. The Second Battle of Saratoga is unleashed, and the fighting is fierce. The Americans are taking heavy losses. Arnold, having no command authority, waits at his headquarters listening to the roar of distant cannons.
General Arnold, I have received reports.
An aide reports that the Americans are disorganized on the field and losing ground to the British advance.
Are in danger.
Frustrated, he disobeys orders. He rallies the men back to the fight. The troops are inspired by the return of their beloved commander and follow him valiantly.
Arnold's on the field! Arnold's back!
When he arrives on the scene, the American line is in total disarray.
Fall in, men! Fall in! Fall in!
Where did the commander go to?
The smoke, the shrieks and the dying, the groans of the wounded, the cannonballs whizzing overhead, it's just chaos reigning supreme. And then suddenly on the battlefield arrives this leader, this person that they all know and respect. It's Benedict Arnold, and his presence on the field electrifies the men, and they are confident at that point in this counterattack that he's now taking charge of, that things are going to turn out all right. They're confident that now he's here, he knows what he's doing, we'll follow him.
Arnold spots Brigadier General Simon Fraser, one of the most revered and accomplished commanders in the whole British Army. He orders Morgan to place one of his sharpshooters in position to kill this crucial enemy officer. This sniper attack on an officer was inconceivable to the British and their sense of battlefield honor.
Fraser is mortally wounded and will die the next day. He is one of the first British generals to be killed in combat by a U.S. marksman.
The loss of General Fraser turned the fate of the day. Lieutenant William Digby, British 53rd Light Company.
Under Arnold's bold leadership, they drive them back behind fortifications designed to protect Burgoyne's left flank.
Blasts of British cannon and musket fire force the Americans back.
On my command, we will charge the redoubt. Your enemy!
The Americans find it very difficult to advance as the battle becomes a stalemate, with each army trading volleys of lead, until Arnold rallies his men.
Arnold, inspired by the fury of a demon, led one of the Patriot charges. Riding in front of the line, his eyes flashing, with a voice that rang clear as a trumpet, he called upon the men to follow him, and he hurled them like a tornado on the British line. Nothing could exceed the bravery of Arnold on this day. There seemed to shoot out from him a magnetic flame that electrified his men and made heroes of them all. Captain Ebenezer Wakefield.
He breaks through the redoubt commanded by the highly disciplined Hessian Colonel Heinrich von Bremen. rebels pour into the gaping hole and overwhelm the Germans, their pots and pans still boiling as they flee. Until this day, no American commander or army ever defeated a standing British force in battle. Saratoga will be the pinnacle of Arnold's military career as a rebel officer and a personal triumph over tremendous hardship. Fighting alongside his men, they have overcome brutal conditions in the Maine wilderness, the Canadian winter at the walls of Quebec, starvation and horrific death from smallpox. They have confronted the Royal Navy at Lake Champlain and have routed the most professional army in the world. And it is Benedict Arnold who led them. Amid the chaos, a young Hessian soldier fires at Arnold.
Our general thought little of danger and forced his way through and spared none, till a ball broke his leg and killed his horse. Oliver Borden, Continental soldier.
American troops rushed to his side. Slammed to the ground by the attacking American troops, the young Hessian is about to be killed.
No, spare the boy.
Major Henry Dearborn asked if he is badly hurt. Arnold is reported to have said, "The same leg. I wish the ball had passed through my heart." A messenger sent by Gates informs him that he is being removed from the field of battle for disobeying orders. Before the first battle of Saratoga at Freeman's Farm, Arnold had run into a group of men from the Connecticut militia and promised all of them one thing that morning, that if the day be long enough, they would have all the British in hell before nightfall. Now, as the sun set at the close of the battles of Saratoga, Arnold held true to his promise, but he could not foresee the personal toll of victory.
And Arnold was carried back to his tent in agony again, but the Battle of Saratoga was as good as over. It was as good as won, because the British now had to retreat.
The British were surrounded by American forces. After 4 months of campaigning, Burgoyne had lost over 1/3 of his entire army. He credited Arnold publicly for, in his words, the success obtained over him, and he must have known how his failure would be received in Parliament.
Under perpetual fire, I have been with my armies in the jaws of famine. Shot through my hat and waistcoat, my nearest friends killed around me. From these combined misfortunes, I imagine I am reserved to stand a war with ministers in London, who will always lay the blame upon the employed who miscarries.
I won't lose my leg, Doctor. I will not have it amputated.
Benedict Arnold lay wounded in an Albany hospital.
Save it!
His leg shattered. He threatened to shoot anybody who tried to amputate it.
And he must have been devastated, destroyed as a man. He gave everything. Gates gave nothing. And Gates walks away with the honor, with the glory and the sword of General Burgoyne.
Thank you, General. I accept your sword of surrender.
The strategic significance of Saratoga cannot be overestimated. It really is the birth of liberty in the modern world. Because what it does, it sets in train a set of falling dominoes which ultimately lead to British defeat in North America. It was Benedict Arnold, his military skill, his courage, his heroism, that pushes over the first domino. And my word, do the dominoes start falling.
It shook the British confidence in their ability to win the war, but most important, it amazed the French. Now they decided maybe the Americans can actually win this war, and Benjamin Franklin had been over there in France for well over a year trying to persuade them to sign a treaty of alliance, finally got some attention. And the next thing you know, the French had signed a treaty of alliance.
It calls Britain's bluff. Britain has gone to war with a peacetime navy and a peacetime army. Now it's faced with a global conflict which it does not have the resources to win.
And if Arnold had been killed at Saratoga, today in Washington there would be two monuments, one for George Washington, one for Benedict Arnold.
Gates is the victor of Saratoga, gets all of the credit, all of the praise that comes to the victor of such a critical battle, one that turns the tide of the war. And Arnold, who's in agony in a hospital, fighting to keep his leg, goes into pretty deep depression.
His leg was saved from amputation, but he suffered a long and slow recuperation. While recovering, he had time to reflect on all he had done for the cause, on all of his sacrifices.
Now having very grave doubts as to whether there is really anything there at the core except another regime with another set of leaders that are just as willful and selfish and potentially tyrannical as those this revolution seemingly was trying to overthrow.
Arnold was very concerned with this idea of corruption. He had felt that the British system was corrupt, and now he was starting to wonder if perhaps the American system was equally corrupt.
In this depression that he's in, something clicks in his mind. He makes a decision. Others have been profiting from the war in all kinds of ways. He's been losing in all kinds of ways. He decides that for his role, from now on, he will worry about himself, about his family, about his money, about his position.
And he will send a letter to Washington, and twice in that letter, he will say to Washington that I wish you all good luck, all Godspeed, all good everything in terms of your cause and your country. And I think that that was an unconscious thing. I'm not sure that Arnold realized that he was saying twice, your country, to Washington. He no longer sees himself as a vital part of the cause, and that it is no longer really his cause, that he has dedicated himself to, that he has fought and bled over, as he wrote so many times.
Nevertheless, Arnold was a major general in the American Army, and he needed a new assignment. His wounded leg rendered him incapable of taking a field command, but Washington wanted to reward him with an assignment worthy of his valor. To Washington, military governor of Philadelphia seemed like a suitable position.
In Philadelphia, after the British left, you started to see almost a mob rule. It was a pretty chaotic situation. You had the patriots who were hanging those who had cooperated with the British during the occupation with no due process, no trial. It was really just a lynching.
When the British Army abruptly ended their occupation of Philadelphia, they left behind a deeply divided community.
Arnold, as the military administrator of Philadelphia, has to deal with these tensions. But no matter what he does, he's going to infuriate somebody. Again, this is a man extremely sensitive to people attacking his reputation on any grounds.
Even though the British military had withdrawn from Philadelphia, remnants of British high society remained. Young women of the upper class had grown accustomed to the company and social life of the handsome and courtly British officers. But the radical patriots in Philadelphia disapproved of anything resembling a British lifestyle.
They were suspicious. Who harbors loyalist sympathies? Who can be trusted? Rumors and whispers of conspiracies were rampant.
This, unfortunately, is the world Benedict Arnold entered, a snake pit of gossip and backbiting. He was a man of action, not an astute politician.
Peggy Shippen, a young socialite, caught his eye. She had come of age during the carefree days of flirtations with the young British officers and continued correspondence with some of them at their new post in New York City. Though her prominent Quaker family was neutral, many in Philadelphia believed that her family held Loyalist sympathies.
It was no surprise that as a widower, Arnold was interested in her. They courted, married, and moved into one of the finest homes in Philadelphia, but that really strained his already weakened finances.
Arnold spent a lot of his own money during the course of the Revolution to support his troops. Congress owed him a considerable amount of money, and they were very stingy about repaying it. Yet another thing that caused Arnold to start feeling discontent.
To earn a living, Arnold returned to the business he knew, trading. But some of his partners were other Philadelphians who had conducted businesses during the time of the British occupation. In the eyes of the radical patriots, these associations looked suspicious.
It certainly didn't look pretty, and it didn't look virtuous. And patriotism is supposed to be about virtue.
He was hardly alone in his troubles with the radicals and Philadelphian members of Congress. Following a long winter when American soldiers were left starving at Valley Forge, there were many hard feelings between military and civilian leaders. Arnold was deeply offended by the neglect of the soldiers.
Our soldiers starve in a land of plenty.
People have been at war for 5 years. This is not an easy win. In 1780-81, they still don't know that they're going to win this. How many more years is this going to go?
By 1780, the war had devastated entire families. Arnold was personally concerned for the widow and young children of Dr. Joseph Warren, an admired Massachusetts leader who had fallen at the Battle of Bunker Hill. His death left his wife and children destitute.
Arnold felt that it was grossly unfair, and it was part of the lack of respect that he was starting to recognize or starting to become aware of by the powers that be.
He conducted a private fund drive on behalf of Warren's family and contributed a generous sum of his own money. He pressed Congress to establish a pension fund for all the families of fallen officers, but the delegates would not fund it. Arnold finally persuaded the delegates to pay Warren's widow half of her husband's salary.
Ironically, the delegates from Warren's own state of Massachusetts abstained on the vote.
He comes to doubt in some form or another what the American cause is about and what the Americans are doing.
He was starting to see that perhaps the Continental Congress didn't view the revolution in the same idyllic way that he did, that they didn't have what he felt were the proper principles that should be underpinning the revolution.
Years of high idealism, sacrifice, and selflessness gave way to complete disillusionment. This disillusionment led him to begin a secret correspondence with a British officer, Major John Andre, whom his wife had known during the British occupation of Philadelphia. Arnold signed the letters George Monk. This choice of alias may reveal his motivation. George Monk is considered a British hero to this day because he turned against his own revolution and helped restore the British monarchy back to power in 1659, sparing his country years of bloody civil war.
One of Arnold's most relentless critics was Joseph Reed, a leader among the city's radical patriots. Reed and the radicals were behind an appalling reign of terror, arresting and executing Tories and Quakers who had cooperated with the British occupiers. Not content with that, they'd even seized their property.
Arnold ended this abuse and profiteering, so these self-proclaimed patriots turned on him. Reed wanted Arnold removed as military governor of the city. He went to General Washington and demanded that Arnold be court-martialed for a minor infraction. He had used government wagons to transport his business partners' merchandise from the port to the shops in the city.
More concerned about his personal honor than the money, Arnold offered to pay for the use of the wagons. Reed, however, wanted to disgrace Arnold. He continued to press Washington, threatening to pull the Pennsylvania militia out of the war.
Already reeling from numerous battlefield setbacks and a lack of support from Congress, Washington bowed to Reed's pressure. In an attempt to appease him, Washington issued a formal public reprimand of Arnold.
This was Washington, who was supposed to be his friend, supposed to be the person who was backing him, a fellow soldier, a fellow officer, and he's reprimanding him.
Arnold felt betrayed.
Arnold requested and received from Washington command of the strategic fortification on the Hudson River, West Point, the key to the continent. Major John Andre, the British officer Arnold has been secretly corresponding with, is traveling back to his post in New York City following his clandestine meeting with Arnold. Having missed his rendezvous with a British vessel, he must now travel through a dangerous no-man's land between enemy lines. It is crawling with bandits. Out of uniform and disguised in civilian clothes, if he is captured, he will be considered a spy. He is stopped by 3 armed men. In this region, Andre is not sure if they are loyalists, rebels, or thieves looking to steal his wool coat and fine leather boots. They force him to disrobe. Hidden in his stockings, they find papers and plans detailing the American defenses at West Point, and a pass signed by the commander, General Benedict Arnold. Andre is arrested, and the suspicious papers are sent to George Washington, who is on his way to West Point for a scheduled inspection. A message is also sent directly to Arnold at West Point, informing him that Andre has been captured. The instant Arnold receives the message, he flees.
Don't kill my baby, please.
When Washington arrives at Arnold's residence, Peggy is hysterical.
Get away from my baby!
The unthinkable becomes obvious. Benedict Arnold has turned.
Get away from my baby.
Washington didn't believe that Peggy had any part of this, and he let her go.
Once released, Peggy joined her husband in the British-occupied city of New York.
Washington is devastated. He proclaimed, "Arnold has betrayed us. Whom can we trust now?"
Attempting to defend his decision, Arnold wrote a letter to his once beloved commander, George Washington.
I have ever acted from a principle of love to my country. The same principle of love to my country actuates my present conduct, however it may appear inconsistent to the world, who very seldom judge right of any man's actions.
To the end of the Declaration, where Jefferson writes those poignant words, "To this we commit our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor," Arnold had already done that. He had already risked his life. He'd already been grievously wounded. He had already spent a considerable amount of his fortune.
I think there was a contract in the Declaration of Independence. Clear ideals so beautifully set out by Jefferson in the Declaration being abandoned and being betrayed, whether on the battlefield or off. And yet Arnold had actually remained faithful to those ideals. There is only so much, I think, that someone who is given so very much to a cause and then finds that the cause has betrayed him.
I think Arnold was ultimately disgusted at what had happened to him, what had happened to the revolution.
The story of Arnold's career as a leading revolutionary, from his point of view, was a story of one betrayal after another betrayal after another betrayal.
In many respects, America more betrayed Benedict Arnold than Arnold betrayed America.
He also explained his actions in an open letter to the people that was published in newspapers throughout the colonies.
To the inhabitants of America, I was only solicitous to accomplish an event of decisive importance and to prevent as much as possible in the execution of it the effusion of blood. Reunion with the British Empire is the best and only means to dry up the streams of misery that have deluged this country.
Arnold is the big figure here because he essentially deserted the American cause in a big way and went to the other side. But there were other soldiers who did the same thing.
Arnold was an extreme case, and of course his case led to dire consequences. But his resentments, his fears, his concern that the Army was not properly supported, that the officers were not properly appreciated, were widely shared throughout the officer corps by 1780.
And the British were hoping that more officers were going to follow Arnold's example and come over. So obviously the Congress and Washington had to make Arnold's actions as evil and villainous as they possibly could. They had to portray this as the most heinous of crimes to discourage anyone else from going over.
Treason of the blackest dye was discovered yesterday.
Arnold, vile, treacherous, and leagued with Satan.
Never since the fall of Lucifer has a fall equaled his.
Curses of ages will attend your name. Traitors alone will glory in your shame.
Even John Henry, the soldier Arnold had once saved during the Quebec campaign, vilified him.
When he wrote his memoirs, he told the story about how Arnold helped him along the way out of his own pocket. But later in the diary, in his memoir, he couldn't help but mention that Arnold, from his point of view, was a very greedy individual.
People were so angry at what Arnold had done, it actually served to bring people together, to sort of unify the cause.
Many have argued that if Benedict Arnold's plot had succeeded, it would have dealt a devastating blow to the American cause.
For the British, it also was a terrible time. And they did not have the political will, they did not have the military resources, and they did not have the money to press on to victory. So even if the Arnold-Andre conspiracy had succeeded, it would not have made any difference to the outcome of the Revolutionary War. In the spring of 1781, British troops under Arnold's command raided Richmond, Virginia. In September of the same year, he attacked his home state of Connecticut. Fires set by the invading force resulted in the burning and destruction of New London. But as a British general, Benedict Arnold had no significant impact on the war or its outcome, and he was never fully trusted by senior British officers. That Arnold was just so good. He showed up the laziness, the ineptitude of many of the British officer corps.
After the war, Arnold resumed his business and shipping ventures operating out of a loyalist community in Canada. but he was never forgotten by some of the men who followed him into battle. One soldier happened to cross his path while working on the docks in Nova Scotia. He did not have the heart to approach his old commander. In 1792, Benedict and Peggy moved to London. Besieged by asthma, gout, and torturous pain in his twice-wounded leg, Arnold struggled to keep himself going. Until June 14, 1801.
He died after a week's severe illness and great suffering. Peggy Arnold.
His death was hardly noted in the London press.
One of the most impressive Revolutionary War monuments sits at top of a hill, and this is a very tall monument, and it's at the center of Surrender Field. As you look up, you'll see a statue of Philip Schuyler. You continue around, you'll see a statue of Daniel Morgan, and you'll continue around to the third side and you'll see a statue of Horatio Gates, all leaders in this great American victory at Saratoga. But as you continue around to the fourth side, you look up and you're going to see an empty casing where the statue of that fourth person would be, and obviously that is the place of Benedict Arnold.
In a small chapel at West Point, plaques memorialize generals of the War for Independence. One plaque has no name, only a date of birth and rank. It is Benedict Arnold's plaque.
There is a stone monument at Saratoga National Historic Park depicting a boot. It has no name, only an inscription memorializing a general's sacrifice and injury on the battlefield. He had joined the Patriot cause for the ideals of liberty in a society that rewards merit. Instead, he encountered an arbitrary system of personal favoritism and cronyism. For well over 200 years, Americans have not appreciated Benedict Arnold's vital contribution to the fight for American independence. Now we're left to wonder, did Benedict Arnold betray his country, or did his country betray him?